This is DEGARIS, Masculist Mgtow flyers. That is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and Mgtow, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. HUGO DEGARIS. This is flyer number 441, entitled Masculist Advice to Governments. Description. The feminists were not content with merely raising women's consciousnesses. They then moved on to change the gender laws to favour women. The masculists are out to do the same by creating men-fair gender laws. This flyer details a longish list of how masculists plan to advise gender politicians and governments on how to do this. Now the flyer itself. Masculist Advice to Governments by Prof. Dr. HUGO DEGARIS. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. This flyer asks how masculists will influence governments. How will governments need to be advised by masculists if our societies are to survive, literally? Question mark. What will provide the spark, the impulse for governments to take note of what the masculists have to say? Question mark. These are really important questions that the manosphere barely touches, yet it's only a question of time before governments are forced to take masculism and the masculists seriously, or we wipe ourselves out. I will start with the spark that ignites government's interest in what the masculists are saying, and more importantly, doing. I see two main ways in which governments will sit up and take note of what the masculists have to say. One is the masculist /Mgtow /MRA induced population crash, and the other is the sheer power of masculist ideas propagated by masculist champions and taken up by the media until they are widespread enough and popular enough for politicians to be forced to pay attention to them or be voted out of power. I'll begin with the manosphere-induced population crash. Masculists claim that the fluffy feminist hypocrites have taken over the divorce courts and made them so toxic for men that in many countries now 2/3 of young men refuse to marry, reject paternity, and spend their money on themselves, living increasingly the Mgtow lifestyle, men going their own way. If the divorce courts are not soon men-fared, then probably the percentage of young men who reject marriage and paternity within a decade will be over 90%, thus wiping out whole populations in a mere generation, a catastrophe in anyone's language. Countries like the US, Canada, Australia are not so conscious of the paternity strike and its consequences, the population crash, since they are migrant nations. So being rich, democratic countries, they attract the world's brains, who supplement the deficit in population caused by the lack of births by the natives. However, in countries like Italy, Spain, Japan, Korea, etc., the birth rate is now in the low ones. For example, in Italy and Spain, it is 1.3 children per woman. In Japan, it's 1.4. And Seoul, the capital of South Korea, has the lowest birth rate in the world at a mere 0.64. The replacement rate is 2.1. Now that the manosphere, that is Mgtow's, MRA's, masculists, are pushing the idea to young men around the world that marriage is toxic, that 1 in 4 fathers will be financially massacred in the hated, fluffy feminist-controlled divorce courts. Young men are rejecting marriage and paternity in their millions. In the coming years, the percentage of young men rejecting marriage and paternity will probably rise to over 90%. When that happens, alarm bells will be going off all over the world as politicians scramble to understand, quote, What the hell is going on? Why are so many more men than women utterly rejecting being fathers? What's wrong with young men? Question mark. End quote. It will be the maskless, in brackets, and I say deliberately the maskless, since the Mgtows, the other major branch of the men's lib movement, is apolitical and passive, or in maskless eyes, political wimps, who are not angry, not political, who don't attack the fluffy feminists, who don't harangue fluffy parasites, etc. So it will be left to the maskless, close brackets, who tell the politicians why men are so rejecting paternity, due to how toxic the fluffy feminist hypocrites have made divorce, hence marriage and paternity. Initially, this educating of the politicians by the maskless will be very difficult for the maskless, since the politicians have been brainwashed by over half a century of feminism, so believe that gender oppression is a one-way street, that it is women who are oppressed and it is men who are the oppressors. I've come across this deep brainwashing in my personal life with my own brother, who is prepared to cut with his own brother, that is me, over the issue of masculism. In his view, masculism is anti-women, and to his mind, being anti-women is taboo. He has been so brainwashed by the feminist-controlled gender media that his brain is incapable of opening a little bit to accept the idea that gender oppression is a two-way street. I may even lose my brother over the issue, the way Negro slavery divided families, brother from brother, father from son, in the run-up to the US Civil War in the 1860s. Politicians have been so brainwashed by the feminist assault on men's minds that they too are afraid to take up masculinist ideas through fear of a massive backlash from the feminists, that is, monoconscious feminazi bigots, MFBs, who then vote en masse against these politicians, forcing them out of power, the ultimate threat to a politician. These politicians are as ignorant of how women oppress men as is my own brother. So it may be that the only way that politicians are forced into awareness of the main reason why men reject paternity, in brackets, that is, the toxicity of the divorce courts taken over by the hated fluffy feminist hypocrites, close brackets, may be via the indirect route of becoming more afraid of the crashing birth rate than they are of feminazis, since the active feminists are only a small proportion of the female population, whereas nearly everyone will become alarmed when the birth rate really crashes, as it already has in South Korea. Some European countries who can afford it are so alarmed at what is happening to their birth rate and to their population crash that they are spending 5% of their GNP on schemes to promote the popularity of having kids. 5% is a staggering amount of money. But sooner or later, probably in the next few years, the crashing birth rate will be one of the hottest political topics of this decade, as large numbers of politicians wake up to the enormous significance of a crashing birth rate and its implications of the very survival of their of their populations and nationhood. In my own view, I think that it's more likely that the route, the spark, that will educate the politicians to amend the gender laws to promote paternity amongst men is not the crashing population, although that will certainly be a major factor, but the ideological impact of masculist champions upon them. What do I mean by masculist champions? I mean masculists who are highly articulate, orators, intellectually armed with a thorough knowledge of masculist and feminist ideas, so that they can be extremely persuasive on the media, getting their main masculist ideas across to a largely ignorant audience, who for decades have had their feminist consciousness raised, but not their masculist consciousness raised, since they know nothing about masculism, about how women oppress men for decades, with their decades-lasting man-slaving parasitism, their financial butchery of one father in four in the hated fluffy feminist-dominated divorce courts. a MARA, maternity rejection right, but no PARA, paternity rejection right. Many decades-lasting gender crimes against men, for example, paternity fraud, pill lying, etc. Society is still largely monoconscious, which by definition means that for most individuals in the population, they are not bi-conscious. That is, they have not had both their feminist and their masculine consciousnesses raised, so tend to be rather feminazi bitchy towards men. For example, my own brother, whom I label an MBP, a monoconscious blue pillar. A blue pillar is a Mgtow label for a man who has not swallowed the red pill, as in the movie The Matrix, that is, remains brainwashed by monoconscious feminists who know nothing of how women oppress men, who today have almost total control of the media in gender political terms. To take the red pill means the decision to know the negative truth, which in the movie is that humans serve as batteries to power the ultra-intelligent machines. Close bracket. And swallowing the blue pill is to stay in the matrix, that is, having direct connections to the brain, which feeds signals from the matrix computer to give the human batteries the impression that they are living in the 20th century. That is, blue pillars are men